And then part of, listening to my body and living in alignment with your soul is like when your soul is saying, this doesn't feel right, what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis isn't in alignment for me anymore, then I'm going to choose something else. I'm going to make a shift. And, so much of what I see when people are sick, they're in jobs that they hate, doing things that they don't enjoy, and yet they continue to do that every day and they wonder why they're sick. I'm pretty open, but I gotten after I did this last podcast, I got a totally unrelated. I'm in the process of closing my practice. I'm going to be no longer working at the end of October, or at the end of September. But um, they asked me questions about mammograms, which I answered honestly. And then I got a letter from the Board of Nursing that they are investigating me for misinformation about mammograms.
Oh my God.
Disparagement of colonoscopies because I said I wouldn't be getting one based on my personal health history and risk factors.
Wow.
So anyways, I wouldn't have thought about that before, but I mean, and I would still say the same thing now, but I mean, it's just the world we live in.
Yeah.
Uh, so I
Wow.
hired an attorney to, just gave him all of my literature, of course, because everything that I said was peer, based on peer reviewed literature. It's just not doesn't toe the line of I guess, the common paradigm. So, anyways, we'll see how the nursing board responds to that.
Yeah. Well, I was going to start somewhere else, but since you brought the retiring part up, I saw your tweet and I'm curious if you want to share a little bit about your practice, but then also I'm just
Yeah.
curious what sparked that decision.
Well, as I know, I have basically a concierge primary care. I've run this for the last, well, I opened my first business in 2013, my first practice, which we provided psychiatric and medical care to substance use treatment facilities around Texas.
Mm.
And I had psychiatric NPs and other family practice NPs. And then, of course, I had some physicians on board because in the lovely state of Texas, I have to have a physician sign a piece of paper once a month, saying, reviewing a chart to say that I'm, doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So anyway, half of the states, I don't have to have any type of relationship with a physician. I can practice to the full extent of my, knowledge and training without that administrative burden. But yeah, so that was my first practice. And then I started this concierge primary care in 2019 and have been doing that and have had other nurse practitioners work for me and run the business at different stages of my, I have 4 kids. So, having children throughout this period. And, and we practice care. So I would say, as far as philosophy of care, we've provided very holistic, care. And I mean that by the actual definition of the word. So, kind of integrating, spiritual, physical, and emotional components of people's health. I mean, because they're not, the idea that they're separate, of course, as you probably know, is not true, right? And so kind of integrating, functional medicine principles, some of these principles from, quantum biology or circadian biology, principles from psychology, and from, being trauma informed, all together into providing primary care for people. So yes, I've been doing that. I started my first business in, like I said, in 2013, and then shortly thereafter had my first child, so the entire time I've kind of felt this, pull between being a mom and a, business person and a business owner, an entrepreneur. And I will say prior to that, I was a college athlete, I played Division I basketball. And so, that was kind of, occupied my life from like, from a large portion of my life from like middle school, all the way through college.
Wow.
And then finished that and was like, oh goodness, what do I do now? And then I started competing and, found CrossFit and started competing in CrossFit and went to, regionals in CrossFit at one point, and then I started opening businesses. So, a big focus of my life from an early age was and that's based on my own woundings, is what can I do to perform and to, please everybody around me and to show my value, because I didn't, I lived grew up in a pretty unstable situation as far as emotionally unstable, I would say, never wanted for a house over my head or food in my mouth. Went to a private school, came from a middle class family, but there was a lot of emotional maturity and dysregulation there. And so anyway, so that drove, a lot of my achievements. And then basically, again, that parlayed into starting businesses and, showing my value in production and, making money. And I guess I've just gotten to a place essentially where I've done enough work that I don't need this to feel worthy anymore. And in fact, this is not where I find, I love what I do, but I love my family more. I love myself. I feel best when I'm spending time on my land, taking care of helping to herd sheep so that so we can tag them, and, which is ridiculous. It's like, that's like hard work and it's dirty work and I'm wrestling sheep. Like we literally did this the other week, like a Saturday, took her, like, we got all the kids because it takes everybody to, we need everybody's help. And usually it's Tucker that's wrangling them, but this time I guess he was sick of me laughing at him or, so I got to wrangle them this time with Bishop, our oldest. And anyway, it's like, that's life-giving. It feels good. I'm outside, I'm in the dirt, I'm with animals, I'm doing something that is providing quite directly for my family. And that's what feels good. And then at the same time, it's like, I made that decision and then I got a postmark, like I said, about the investigation for misinformation from the nursing board, which, by the way, the Texas Board of Nursing has not defined what misinformation is. And of course, all that started during COVID, right? Misinformation and disparagement, right? Because I said I didn't plan to get a colonoscopy based on my personal health history and risk factors, because I'm a human, and I feel that I'm free to talk about my personal decisions and health habits. But that's not, so that just felt like, a postmark from, from the universe saying, yes, Veronica, you made the right decision, but, and I will say too, so I'm going to be transitioning to homeschooling my oldest two. Bishop's been homeschooled the last couple of years. Vaughn, our second, wanted to homeschool this year. And my youngest two will be at the school that we, helped start in Dripping. But, doing that, doing more on our land. That's what I'll be spending my time doing. But I think, all of that's, because I just can't, I talk to people all day about the importance of these things, but then Monday through Friday, I spend a fair amount of time, in an office, this office I've got here in Dripping, I've got, window, and I often go outside, that I can open up. But like when I'm in Austin, it's a medical building, I'm inside under fluorescent lights and that doesn't feel good to me. And then, I'm on call. So I'm on my phone, I'm on my computer, I'm documenting, and, that doesn't feel good to me. I don't want to be on my computer so much. And also when I don't allow my children to, to be on screens and then they see me, even though, I'm like, I'm working. It's not that I'm just scrolling, but there's just, that doesn't feel to be in alignment. I don't want to, I want to, I'm telling them not to do something yet, then mommy's on it. And the other part too is like, I feel best. It's giving me the opportunity, right, to design a life where I feel healthiest, but then also, I also don't want to spend all the time in my head, intellectual, because if I'm spending all day, sleuthing and problem solving for other people and their health issues, right? And of course, a lot of that I'm using my intuition. But there is a large portion that I'm in my head all day, and I just don't want to do that anymore. As I've become more integrated as a human, as I've, done so much emotional work and continue to, right? That just doesn't feel good to me. And so that's kind of, and then I guess the last thing I would say, because it's like, it's all, the universe is perfect, right? And it's timing and God, universe, whatever you want to call that. I feel that I'm such a different person now than when I started my practice, and my view of healthcare has changed such that the current kind of rules of engagement, and even though what I'm doing is very much outside of the modern paradigm, right, of what, if you want to call it, centralized medicine does, I would, I'm outside of that, but it's still something about it doesn't feel quite right. I think there's a whole other layer as far as sovereignty is concerned, where even just, viewing me as the expert, right? And just even how that relationship happens, that I don't know, there's something that I think it needs to shift somewhat, because I think people really have to. I think you're your own healer.
Mm.
At best, I'm a guide and a light, and but you have to heal yourself, and that involves a totally different level of responsibility um, for the client, right?
Yeah. And that's something that I'm sure even as like a practice trying to engage with your clients that way still happens. Like people think of you as the expert and want to delegate responsibility. But it's something that I really valued while I was a client with UltraPersonal, was that I just was like presented options and then not swayed toward any particular one, and I could choose whatever I wanted or not none of them. And it was just like having, someone that has maybe more information or knowledge on the line.
Well, right, right.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I pay an accountant, but
right.
I'm not, you're not, because I don't want to go read the tax code, right? But I still need to be actively engaged in that. And, and in the past, right, I've sent my children to school, but I found that even, there's a saying, I forget who says this, but, any responsibility that you lay down will be picked up and used
Mm,
against you by a tyrant. And I really feel that that is true. I mean, I felt that even, we helped found a school, and it's full of, people that share a lot of the same values. Now, they might have a different ordering of their values, etc. But even then, I'm like, wow, there's still, I'm shipping off my children to spend 8 hours a day with someone else who doesn't necessarily have, the same investment in my child that I do, because I've had several experiences with my kid, having teachers dump their emotional, have shadow pieces that they haven't dealt with and dump that on my children, rather
mm,
than look at that mirror and do the hard work themselves, and that's part of being human, right? But at this point, I don't want to subject my kids to that. I think ultimately I'll probably be homeschooling all of my kids.
mm,
But yeah, I mean, and I think you could look at, and I think healthcare is the same way. You can certainly, consult with someone who that's their area of expertise, and they probably may have more knowledge than you, but ultimately it is up to you, and you have to, feel a level of responsibility that your healing is your responsibility, At best, I can just point you in the right direction and educate you on the options available and the possible, benefits and downsides of those things.
how did you find out about teachers doing that? Is it because you were like present?
I mean, I'll give, I mean, one example, which would be, a few years ago, my son, he kept coming home. This was like he was at Alston Waldorf, and then 2020 happened and they were masking the kids and virtual. And so we left with a group of other families and started like a cooperative that we were part of. And he had his second or third year, he had a teacher there that, he kept coming home every day saying things like, she doesn't like the boys, she favors the girls, and things like that. And I just took it with a grain of salt. I didn't really, I was like, oh, he's, I didn't really hear him.
Mm.
Um, and at one point, there was an incident and the teacher called me, and then all of a sudden, everything that he had been saying, like as she started talking to me, like it just kind of the puzzle pieces, fit together. And I'm like, oh my God,
Wow.
she has an issue, and she's, but divorced and clear. Like I was picking up wow, she's got issues with men. And this is clearly playing out with the boys in her class. And it wasn't just my son, right? And she was dividing, the class up, and there was clear, different treatment based on the genders, right?
Wow.
And that was just a real like light bulb, moment for me. And, we went to Bishop and said, hey, I told my husband about the conversation that I had. And it's like, oh my God, everything he said, like, this is really happening, and, so we told him like, hey, you will never have to have that teacher again. We will do whatever we need to do to, we started a school. And then, things didn't fully work out for him, there. His teacher got fired and they didn't find a replacement. And long story, that's irrelevant. But so he's homeschooling. But yeah, that's just one example. And I have another,
Yeah.
got 4 kids. I've got my second, my daughter has similar, some of her things in her. She's very free spirit, doesn't like to be told what to do. Very much that wild feminine is online in her, right? Which has been suppressed so much by society. And that's been hard for me to really, she's been a mirror to me on the parts of myself that I've suppressed, right? So that's been very triggering for me, but also a great growth, opportunity for me. And, she's triggered a teacher in the same way, and, we work to try to coach that teacher through, but it just, it's not her child. She doesn't have the same investment. So, and that's hard work to do, to look at those parts of yourself that you might have abandoned or rejected.
I think a lot of things that I've witnessed from afar, you and Tucker doing just, like they start masking your kids, and it's not just like, let's put them in a different school. It's, let's start our own school. And
Yeah.
just all of these really amazing kind of
Well,
like
there
taking
wasn't,
responsibility.
well, there wasn't a better, there wasn't any better option at that point, like, I mean, most of the schools were doing that, right? And so it's like, well, we're not going to subject our children to this, which clearly felt wrong. And is, I mean, now I think most people, will accept the fact that's probably not very good for anyone, but certainly children and, developmentally can cause issues, right?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, we weren't going to continue to subject our children to something that we felt was not good for them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, I guess it's sad that that's not, because it's hard, right, to take that level of responsibility. But it's sad to me that more people don't do that, and that I didn't have parents who were willing to do that, because I hated school. Like
Mhm.
if I could have dropped out of like elementary school, I would have dropped out and just been at home or learned different ways. But I was always told it's just something you have to do until you're 18. And it's like, well, this sucks. And that
Yeah.
shaped the person that I am in good ways and bad ways. And so it's just really admirable to me to have people that are modeling different behaviors than what I grew up with. Um, what is homeschooling like? I don't know. I mean, I know the idea, right? But I don't know what that
Yeah.
actually looks like.
Well, I mean, I would say it probably looks different for every person that you talk to. I'd say we're doing more of a unschooling situation. A lot of people will do homeschool and they'll like, do follow a curriculum. And so it's curriculum that would be taught at school, but you're just doing it at home. And because, you're just teaching to your child, typically you only, it's reading, writing, math, etc. is only taking a couple hours a day, right? Um, it's not very time consuming. It's much more efficient. But the way that we approach it, and of course, this is going to be, Tucker ran a homeschool with Bishop last year, but and I'm going to be new to this, right? And I'm going to be learning, but the way that I'm approaching it is that I'm more of like a coordinator. So I've, queried with my kids to see what they're interested in, and like Vaughn wants to do flute lessons. Bishop wants to do bass guitar lessons. I've got them signed up for got my friends that own a CrossFit gym to put together a homeschool CrossFit class. Bishop's doing jujitsu. They have art class. Finding a tutor to do, reading and writing, because we've delayed that. They've been in Waldorf, which doesn't, writing and reading is taught later, so that
Okay.
children can spend more time playing. Like kindergarten, pre-K, nursery, they're not learning letters. Like I remember learning letters in kindergarten, and these days, when I have kids come in, like I had a kindergartner come in and like, yeah, the school's got them doing 30 sight words or something like that, which is just, why are we doing that? I mean, I shouldn't say we, I'm not doing that, but as a society, I mean, that's totally inappropriate. A 5-year-old should be playing. They should be outside playing, creating, imagining, experiencing the world. Yet we, quickly direct them, society quickly directs them into their head to start intellectualizing things. And that's a problem, I think. So,
Yeah.
that's the way that I'm looking. And we're also going to be like, we're going to about to order a yurt, because, each of our kids wants their own like building on our property.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
and so, Vaughn, who's, like I said, she very much values freedom and independence. And of course, what we continually instill with her are, is the responsibility that comes with that, right? And she's learning, but she wants a yurt. And so my plan is and that needs to be on a platform. And I don't know how to build that. So get somebody to help show us and help us build the platform, and the kids will be involved in that. And that's going to be part of their homeschooling too.
Wow.
This morning I left to come to the office, Tucker was putting up posts for one of our orchards, and they were helping him with that.
Mm.
So that type of thing is very much going to be involved in their homeschooling, or preparing, meals, menus, and then actually cooking, actual real life skills.
Yeah. Are there still like certifications or like some kind of document that the state requires you to?
In Texas, I don't think there's any, don't quote me on this, but in Texas, I don't think there's any requirements or,
Okay.
standardized testing you have to do. You don't have to report to the state, as far as I'm aware, about anything. Now, that's not true in all states.
Yeah. Yeah. When I heard that, like that there's some states where you can't not have your kid like follow a specific, I was like, what?
Yeah,
That's
that's crazy.
crazy. Yeah.
Basically, you don't have, they're essentially saying we own your children.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I mean, I think, didn't Biden say that at some people? I mean,
That
yeah,
how many times have they all said it?
yeah, yeah.
Um, so you're retiring, homeschooling, and yet there still seems to be like a very strong passion to keep learning about
Mhm.
like the quantum biology and circadian biology, and what's driving that now if you're, it seems like, already kind of like have optimized your environment and your life.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I would like to say, that's curiosity. I like to understand how things work, right? I mean, I have a you don't need to, and maybe that's part of my ego and a distraction. I could make that argument. I've queried that in myself in the past, because honestly, it doesn't really matter how it works per se. I mean, it's helpful to know how these things work if you're trying to help someone fix
Right.
themselves, right? So I think that's where most of it comes from, because I'm still, I've always, as long as I can remember, been passionate about, how we can live our best, healthiest lives, right? But I mean, in real simple terms, it doesn't really matter how it works. As an individual, all you need to know is, I mean, I think the keys to health are living in alignment with nature and your soul. And if you're doing that, then you're going to be healthy.
Mm.
And you're going to live a good life. And being aligned with nature means, being outside. We evolved outside under the sun, exposed to the elements. Now most people are inside 99% of the time under, artificial light. It's not as bright inside as it is outside, right? And of course, our biology is predicated on the environment, that we evolved in, which is outside, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so living in alignment with that, bright days, dark nights, it's getting your hands in the dirt, exposing yourself to the cold, even if that's a little uncomfortable, and the heat, being around animals, helping to procure your own food, which is, at this point, 99% of our protein we produce ourselves. My family does, we raise our own eggs, we raise meat birds a couple times a year, we raise sheep, and then, Tucker and the kids hunt. So we have venison, elk sometimes. It's pretty much the only thing. And I'm going to start making, my kids still, love like that Applewood, Applegate Farms, chicken maple sausage. So like literally that's the only thing. And also I do love some good Applewood smoked bacon. So, it's about, when we've been talking about having, maybe getting a couple pigs so that we don't really eat much pork outside of bacon, and really that's mostly me. But buying a couple pigs so that we can raise our own, bacon. But it feels good. I know where my foods come from. I know how it's raised. It's sure as hell local, because it,
Yeah.
grew in my backyard. That's what it means it's really not that complex, right?
Yeah.
And then part of, listening to my body and living in alignment with your soul is like, when your soul is saying, this doesn't feel right, what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis isn't in alignment for me anymore, then I'm going to choose something else. I'm going to make a shift. And, so much of what I see when people are sick, they're in jobs that they hate, doing things that they don't enjoy, and yet they continue to do that every day, and they wonder why they're sick.
And it's almost like, at least in my experience, my soul kind of like gives me the sign first, and it always is to return to nature in some way. Like, I used to write a lot, maybe like 5 or 6 days a week, a couple hours every day. And I had this idea in my head that I can only write in pitch black. So I was
Mm.
in a pitch black room with my bright computer on my eyes. And I just always felt like I wish I could just spend more time outside and not be doing this, but I didn't understand why. And
Mm.
then years later, I'm learning about all this stuff. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I would say, a big message that I got as I was, doing emotional work was, you cannot be separate from nature and be healthy. I
Yeah.
didn't really understand fully what that meant. And, I think I have a better grasp of that now.
Yeah. I think that's one of my, I don't want to say criticisms, but just something I feel that is lacking, at least in the material that I learned about trauma, is
Mhm.
that there is a message to return to nature, but it's
Mhm.
not like, here's exactly why. Like, I never read anything about light, like
Well, I don't
EMS.
think they understand. I don't think they understand why, right? Necessarily. I mean, that's where we get
Yeah.
into the siloed, where siloing expertise off. There's limitations to that.
I guess my question is, like, when I started learning about the quantum and circadian stuff, there was a moment where I started feeling, does this go against all the trauma, or like, is this new information that now cancels out the old? And after talking to several people, I'm coming back to like, no, it's just there are gaps. Um,
Well, I don't view it as gaps as I view it as there's different layers.
okay.
Like I said, when I think of healing and when I think of the human beings, right? There's a physical layer, that's there's definitely things happening on a biochemical level, right? There's an emotional and spiritual and energetic levels, right? And my experience working with patients over the last, decade plus is that you have to pull levers at each of those levels for healing to occur. Like, for instance, take a Hashimoto's disease. That's autoimmune hypothyroidism. The most common cause of hypothyroidism is it's an autoimmunity, right? Or I wouldn't call it a cause, but the etiology. Most hypothyroidism is an autoimmune hypothyroidism. And so certainly we can address things. And the way that I view that is it's a thyroid, the traditional view I would say is that, or the modern view is that, oh, well, the immune system's attacking the thyroid. In other words, the body's attacking itself. Well, that doesn't really make any sense to me. I don't think the body makes mistakes like that. I really view it as a thyroid repair deficit. In other words, the immune system's mounting response, the thyroid's trying to repair itself, but it's unable to for some reason. And something is stimulating the nervous system, I'm sorry, the immune system. And that can be internal, unprocessed trauma, repressed emotions. It's no coincidence that the thyroid's in the neck, and it seems that a lot of people, they often are women, right? More women than men have autoimmune disease in general, and more women have Hashimoto's disease. But there is a inability or resistance to speaking your truth.
Mm.
So there's always an emotion. So we can work on trying to identify what is it that's triggering the immune system. Is it a food sensitivity? Is it an environmental toxin? Something, is it Lyme disease, some sort of stealth infection. But usually there's also an emotional, component there, like that, a shutting down where they've shut down their own voice.
Yeah.
And so if we just work on and dabble in the physical realm, that's not going to address the refusal to speak one's truth or to use one's voice. That has to be addressed on a different level. And even emotion, it has to be addressed on the emotional level. And then there's like an energetic or nervous system imprint there. Like I was just talking to a friend of mine in shaman today. She was kind of talking about this emotionally, there's dealing with things emotionally, and maybe you've worked through some of that, but you've got to address the nervous system, or and the nervous system's an energetic system, right? So addressing that too. So there's different layers to it, right? And the Bessel van der Kolks of the world, and Peter Levine, maybe they're obviously expertise on their, maybe it's the emotional level, right, that they're working on. Or Porges with polyvagal theory, probably, obviously understand some stuff about the nervous system there too, right? But I don't think he grasps the stuff that like Cruz is talking about,
Yeah.
So, nutrition, right, comes into that too, because if you're in a traumatized state, so this is where it gets back to the physical biochemical level. If you're in a traumatized state, which is a sympathetic nervous system dominant state, that is a very energy intensive state to be in, right? And so you better believe that you are going to, burn through your micronutrients.
Mm.
So you may need some generally speaking, I'm not, I try to opt for whole foods opposed to supplements, whenever possible. But sometimes in these, if someone's in such an energy intensive state, they may need supplements for a period of time
Mm.
to replenish, right? As they work on the nervous system regulation and the emotional issues, right? So I don't view it as gaps. I just view it as different layers. And oftentimes, there's just silos of expertise. The person who's an expertise on the nutrition piece may not understand the psychological piece, because people tend to stay in in their lane, so to speak.
Do you think it's possible? Jack Cruz hasn't. I really haven't heard him talk too much about trauma, and
Hmm.
just based on, obviously I don't know him, so this is like a very abstract judgment. But he still strikes me as someone who carries trauma.
Oh, sure. And
Yeah, yeah,
he has narcissistic tendencies. I mean, we can talk about that openly. Um, I mean, I think his message would be received by more people if he didn't come off in the way that he comes off, right?
yeah,
And his interactions, right? There's clearly some relational issues there, right? And that stems from trauma. And I don't know his history or background, and I don't know him personally either, right? But yeah, there's clearly, and so people's work, just like as I've been helping people find, new healthcare providers, every healthcare provider, every person, their work is informed by their experience, right? And I was talking to the shaman about this today, right? Like, the more that you have navigated, if you're talking about it as a healer, the darker spaces you've navigated yourself, you can therefore like then hold that space for other people. Like, I'm hard pressed to find like take a midwife. I had 4 home births. Certainly there are midwives out there who haven't had children, but I think and this isn't a knock on them per se, but you are going to be a better provider, a better midwife if you've traversed that terrain yourself, because there is a trust that comes with experience. Now, you can have trust without having lived the experience, but you're going to have feel more comfortable helping your client navigate more, right? So say something, if you haven't navigated it yourself and you know that, okay, this situation, it seems a little bit sketchy, but I know what the corners of, I know what the corners of the rooms are. I know what the bounds are because I've been there before. Like, we're still in safe water, we're in good water right now. But if you haven't explored the bounds of all of the corners of the room, you might be more likely to refer that person to the hospital sooner, for instance, because you don't know the depths of what's possible. It's the same thing, patient who's suicidal. I had an interesting patient recently that she hadn't seen a doctor in like 20 years because the last time she went to the primary care, and she filled out like a PHQ-9 or a GAD-7, which are these forms to, measure anxiety and depression, which, I include those in my practice because they're informative. But what the doctor did is she filled it out on intake and said, "Oh, you're very depressed." They called 911, took her via EMS, and had her hospitalized against her will, and so, of course, that was a huge, because she said she was, yeah, I'm depressed. I feel maybe a little suicidal. That was a horribly traumatizing experience for her. And she came in my office and I said, "Well, are you suicidal?" So, yeah, sometimes I want to, I don't want to live anymore.
yeah,
Um, and I said, "Oh, okay. Well, do you have a plan? Is there something?" "No, I don't have any plans. And, I hope I don't do that." And I said, "Well, I hope you don't either." We talked about, different resources available to her, but it was just a feeling she had. She just, most people, I won't say most, but maybe it probably is most, but a lot of healthcare, like they get scared. It's not that they want to hurt I mean, they want to help the person, but if they don't aren't comfortable with the depths of human emotion, they get scared and they're worried about liability. And it scares them when someone says, I don't want to live, or I want to kill myself. Which this is just a fleeting emotion, feeling this person has, and they just need to be heard and seen and voice it, and then it'll pass. And at the end of the day, she's a sovereign being. And if that's the choice that she makes in her life, it doesn't have anything to do with me.
Yeah. That piece about suicide is I've shared that experience as well as like I've never had the actual plan to do it, but I've had the feeling of like I want pain to stop, right? And it's so awesome to have gone through that so that now anytime someone brings that to me, my default is just curiosity. 'Cause it's like I think Louis C.K. even has a joke about this where he's like, if I say I'm suicidal, are you gonna like press a button and then like SWAT falls down on me? And it's like, yeah, that's most people I think are afraid to even engage with that the same way that like,
Because they might deny that pain in themselves, and that's scary to them. They don't want to look at that.
yeah, it's scary, it's uncomfortable, or they don't want to like make a mistake because what if this person doesn't want me to ask them about that or whatever. I experienced that a lot, and this is something I want to get into as well. My dad, he died last year of brain cancer. Um, and it was so interesting to notice whenever I brought it up with people, the most common response I would get was, I'm so sorry. If you need anything, I'm here.
Mhm.
Instead of, what do you need? Or just
Just doing something here. Yeah, just
yeah, or even just like, what is it like for you to be going through this? Or,
how are you doing? What are you feeling? Yeah.
yeah. And so I believe, I forget exactly when it happened, but you also lost your father
Mhm.
in the last several years. I forget exactly when it was.
Yeah, he died right before I met Tucker. So it's been, maybe like
Oh,
2011.
oh, so it
Yeah.
was a while ago. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you must have been, how old were you when he passed?
I mean, 26,
Okay.
maybe 27, something like that.
Okay. So
Yeah.
almost exactly like the age I was. What was that process like of grieving? Because I feel like the expectation of what grief is
Mhm.
affected my grief process.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I had not done any emotional work then, and I don't, that's a good question. I don't know if, yeah, I recall taking time off from work, right, and helping my mom. And it was kind of sudden. His death was sudden. He had like a massive heart attack. Like both of him and my mom, I mean, my mom's a nurse. And he was having these like shoulder pains for like quite a while. And the last time I had seen him, um, we were walking around Lady Bird Lake in Austin, and he was like out of breath, I'm like, Dad, there's something like that's not because my dad was not out of shape. Like, I mean, well, he'd probably deconditioned, but he was tall, thin, he appeared, right. If you looked at him, you'd think he was in fine health, right? And like most things at the time, I mean, my relationship with my dad was very strained, I would say. I loved him very much, but he was also very easy to anger,
Mm,
um, and dysregulated, right? I mean, he had his own issues, and so like for instance, my last really probably interaction with him was arguing about like, Dad, you need to go get checked out. There's something wrong with you, and him arguing with me about that, right? It's like, I think you have a heart issue. I think you need to go get this checked out. He didn't like doctors because of his own experience, and I think he had high blood pressure that was untreated. And, he spent a lot of time sitting in front of a TV and, studying and reading on the computer. And I probably had some mild diabetes. He liked bread, and, because he was thin. He was like, I didn't think he had to watch what he ate in that since, bread and ice cream. And so yeah, so I guess I'm not sure that I grieved it at that, because I was very much emotionally dissociated at that stage of my life. I
Okay.
would say that I was a very like even keel person, but really I was just emotionally dissociated.
Hmm. Did it catch up to you and you grieved it later?
I mean, I think part of I wouldn't say I grieved his death so much. I mean, I mean, I was certainly sad that he died. I mean, I loved my father and I was sad at the time that he died, but I don't think that I knew what grief was then. I mean, I definitely have had a lot of experiences and worked through a lot of stuff around our relationship, and grieving that. Um, so yeah, that's an interesting question. It's kind of complex,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, no, I was just curious. I thought it maybe had been more recent, and so that's why I was curious to ask
yeah,
about it.
yeah. I mean, yeah, I am not sure what I'm definitely, now more in touch with my emotions than I was then. Back then it was, as with them, it was compartmentalized and keep trucking along and achieving and doing all of those things.
Yeah. What is your relationship? I've heard Tucker like just offhand on podcasts mention that like you and your mom have rifts. I and this is all my questions are usually because I have the same thing going
Yeah.
on in my own life. And one of the worries that I've had is like my mom and I aren't super close. We're kind of in the like rebuilding, seeing if we can have a relationship phase. And so I think, if I have kids, how involved do I want her to be?
Mhm.
I believe, I don't know if this has changed, that like Tucker's mom is not in the picture at all with your family, but your mom is. And so, how have you navigated having kind of a strained relationship with your mom and also allowing her to be a part of your life and your children's lives?
Yeah, I mean, like I've never not communicated with my mom, or there's never been a full separation, I would say. Definitely, there has been at times a strained relationship. I mean, it's complicated, right? Like I grew up in a house where my parents they said they loved me. They told me they loved me all the time. They came to all of my basketball games, etc. They provided for me physically, but they were not emotionally available. And there was a lot of denial of my reality,
Mm,
with things that was going on. And there was, like my dad, didn't feel comfortable with emotion, right? And so he would say things when I would cry, I would say things like, don't cry, that's weak, that's showing weakness. Um, so my mom has her own, I mean, both of my parents, my dad grew up in a neighborhood where he saw people killed, as a young kid. He was born in 1940. I mean, he walked down, there's stories of him walking down the street and cursing the mailman who, was bringing a draft letter for his father, at 2 years old. Like, what 2-year-old is cursing the mailman, walking down the street? Like, that's odd. So clearly there was issues there, and my mom's got her own stuff that I'll leave for her to maybe talk about someday, right? But she's got some serious trauma history that was not even acknowledged. She didn't even acknowledge it until like within the last, few years. And so, my parents were not emotionally available for themselves, and so they weren't emotionally available for me, right? And so, yeah, so I grew up, my parents said all the right things, but like, that's a very confusing, that's what complex trauma is, right? Like, that's very confusing when love is mixed with abuse.
yeah.
And not abuse as if they were hitting me, but I mean, emotional neglect, I guess you would, and it wasn't even purposeful, right? They did their best. But they didn't even have any awareness or consciousness about the issues that they were dealing with. And so I've had a lot of there were periods of time where I had a lot of anger, um, uh, towards my mom in particular, just based on the way the dynamics were in my family, because I didn't understand why I felt resentful and like, I felt very angry, but I didn't understand it. So then I would feel guilty about it, right?
Mm,
And having subsequently worked through stuff, I mean, I understand I had a reason to be angry, like I'd spent my life, much of my childhood, like parenting my parents, particularly my mother, right? And so of course there's a lot of anger around that. And I think I've worked through a lot of that, but I'm not gonna like sit here and say that there isn't any of that still left there. And I don't know, and part of it too is I don't know that again, I'm an adult now, and so while my parents were involved with these woundings, as if you will, it's now my responsibility to heal them, right? So yeah, so my mom is a great grandmother. She's present, and she's done a lot of work over the last few years. And so, the benefits far outweigh the downsides. But it's not just sunshine and rainbows type of, there's just a lot of history and baggage there. And I'm working through that. And I think she's doing her work. But we're on, good ground.
have psychedelics played a role in your own healing?
Yes. I think that especially earlier on when I was pretty emotionally dissociated, not in touch with my emotions. I mean, I would tell you that I was a very even keel person, but really I just wasn't feeling,
Mm,
I had depths of lots of sadness and grief and anger, right, that I repressed. And you can't disassociate from those things without disassociating from all the joy and the happiness as well. And so that I think that was very important for tapping into those things. I'm sure it would have been possible without it, but it would have probably been a much longer road and more difficult. And I'm not sure, I don't know if I would have gotten there, maybe, maybe not. But I think the thing with those are very powerful tools. But I think, a friend of mine, Kelly Folkrod, who's a therapist here in town, says, once you get the message, you hang up the phone, and I'm in touch with my emotions. I can get to the spaces that I could not get to before, right? By just slowing down and being present with myself, so yeah, so that's played a part, but also craniosacral therapy, shamanic energy work, talk therapy. I've been in talk therapy for the last decade. That started with psychoanalysis, which I wouldn't say is terribly helpful. I don't recommend that as a modality because it's all intellectual, but it was a place that I started. And then, subsequently, now I'm still going once every other week, you know, and there's still stuff there for me to, work on, but it's the way that, and that's more trauma focused modalities, so internal family systems, NARM, somatic experiencing, that type of thing, and which is more about what are you feeling in your body, what part of you, right, what need is there that's needing to be expressed or whatever,
yeah.
uh, yeah. So those are kind of the things that I've used, and even just being out in nature, but I don't think that, as I mentioned, like, I've seen, for instance, some of those, quantum people, oh yeah, just go out in nature and that's gonna solve all your problems. And, maybe that does, trauma is, I believe, stored in the fascia. And, so there's certainly elements of quantum biology and going in nature that are absolutely going to help heal you the same way that, getting a very nutrient dense diet is going to help heal you. But essentially trauma is something that is relational. We are human beings, we are social beings. Trauma happens in relation to other people, and trauma, therefore, really, I believe, needs to be healed in relation with other people.
Hmm.
If you can't regulate your nervous system yourself because you did never have parents who had regulated nervous systems who could teach you that, such as in my situation, I needed, it doesn't have to be a therapist, I suppose, right? It could be anybody with a regulated nervous system that's informed and, but there needs to be some information there that understanding of trauma and how it works, et cetera. But I was able to regulate myself off of my therapist's nervous system until I could develop that nervous system regulation and sense of safety within myself, right? And that's about healing stories and feeling the feelings. Like, I'm sorry, but going out in the sunshine isn't going to solve your repressed feelings that you've never felt. And if those stay stuck in you and you don't feel them somehow, no amount of sunshine during the day and darkness at night and avoidance of non-native EMF is going to solve that problem for you.
Yeah, I think the only in my head when I was questioning a lot of this was like, do you see animals in the wild that have these experiences, or do they just like shake it off and then
They shake it off, but we don't do that.
so it's because we've disconnected ourselves so much that we now have to incorporate these other modalities.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and we don't live in tribal societies. And I mean, as far as I'm aware, most native cultures have like they have a healer, a shaman, but we've disconnected ourselves from that tradition. We don't live with extended family, who can help us raise our children. And yeah, we don't carry those traditions anymore. So where are you supposed to? So yeah, of course, to throw out, I mean, and that's not to say that there aren't bad therapists out there. The majority of therapists are not good therapists. The majority of therapists have not worked through their own shit. They've gotten into the profession in order to work through their stuff, which is fine, right? Like, but you have to have awareness of that and know where you are. But if you have, if you're engaging in good therapy, and if you're not just sitting with someone who's just empathizing with you all day, which is not helpful,
Mm,
or someone who's just helping you come up with like strategies to this and that, which again is not with how to deal with life, that's not helpful. But if you're kind of engaging in the way that I've kind of described earlier, right? Then yeah, there's absolutely a utility for that. And maybe that used to be provided by the village shaman. Yeah, to say that all therapy or all trauma work is not useful, or that's nonsense.
yeah. The only other moment in my life that I've had this questioning, and it was very proven wrong, and you'll know the story. I had Javon, who used to be the CEO of Scribe
Yeah,
Media,
yeah.
on the podcast years back. And we talked about therapy a little bit, and he told me basically like, yeah, I went a couple times and I hated it. My therapist didn't understand me, yada yada. And I just remember mulling that over, thinking like, how is this man like that is so loved and never gone to therapy? Like, how is this possible? And then a year or two ago, it comes out he was like stealing money and all these crazy things. The culture wasn't as great as it was talked about, and it was like,
Well, the culture was good when Tucker and Zach were there, I would say, or was better. But here's the deal. You don't have to be healed to be well liked. In fact, a lot of narcissists are well liked, but clearly they've got some issues, right? Like being well liked does not equate to being emotionally healthy.
more than being liked, it felt like he understands a lot of things on like a deeper level and he's able to help people. But maybe that was just my.
Well, Javon definitely understood people. I'm trying to think of how to put this. He understood well, and he's a great reader of people and can use that to his advantage, right? But that doesn't mean having that awareness and understanding what drives and ticks people doesn't mean that you can see that in yourself.
Hmm.
But I wouldn't say that he has a lot of awareness of trauma or emotional stuff at all,
Yeah, maybe he was.
from my experience of him. But you know, you could measure him as successful and well liked, and all of those things would have been true on an external level.
Yeah, and he was also great at like using his words. It's a certain way to be persuasive.
Right,
And
because he understood what drives people. He's a very, I mean, probably a genius at understanding what makes people tick, and you know, and reading different people. I mean, that's how he survived as a child, I believe, you know. But that's different from applying that to yourself and seeing yourself clearly.
I guess where I want to end, to bring it back to how the conversation started, there's this whole, I've recently started using Twitter again after being off of it for a really long time. And I see a lot of either like women being valued for being super high work ethic and like money and power, all the things that they think they want, or this trad wife movement of like submissive ideology. And you don't strike me as falling in either one of those. And so I'm curious, like, if you had to make up a third, like a happy medium, or maybe not a medium, just your own idea of that, what would that be as far as like what a fulfilling life for a woman could be? Or for you, let's just speak for yourself.
Yeah, because I was going to say that's gonna vary by person, by individual, and I would say it's not surprising that you see two extremes, right? Because we've been living in a society that has very much advocated for, you know, the working woman, and very much influenced by feminism, and pushing this message of equality between the genders, etc. And so, of course, the backlash or the reaction to that, I mean, generally, just like as you're healing, if you haven't tapped into your anger before, like anger is a very healthy emotion. Anger is how you create boundaries. But if you are new, if you've suppressed that in yourself and you're just learning, you're probably going to like be a little extreme with it at first. It's not going to be very well balanced and regulated when it presents itself, right? You might be a little aggressive with the anger and outward, you know, rather than, you know, just using that anger to set a healthy boundary. The same thing is true as with what, you know, our society, what, you know, our culture and society has pushed on women, which is this, you know, again, what I mentioned, you know, the working woman, you know, you can have it all, you can have kids, you can have a career, and you can have it all at once. You can be a super woman, you know, which is bullshit. You can't. Ask me how I know. Um, and um, and so of course you're going to have a swing of the pendulum to the opposite extreme, right? Which I guess is what this trad wife movement is. But I think that for me, I've realized, you know, as I again do my emotional work, I no longer need to, you know, I grew up feeling that I needed to produce to be loved and to be worthy. And I now know and feel that I'm worthy just because I exist, you know, and I don't have to produce anything to show that. And I also felt too that, you know, growing up, like there was no, like a housewife, or, you know, was invisible. Like there was no value in being a wife and a homemaker, which is crazy, of course, because there is no society without mothers, you know. So I've just in unwinding my emotional need for the career and then the social programming, right? I've realized that, I think probably for a long time that I've just had this yearning, to have a more simple life and a more simple life with less responsibility outside of the home, because I want to both take care of myself, but then also use my energies to take care of my family, my husband and my children. I have 4 children. That's a lot of kids. Um, and that takes a lot of time and attention. They need a lot from me and they deserve that. And I need a lot from me and I deserve that. And so, and it's not that, I do have a passion for what I've done in my career. And maybe I'll do some form of that again at some point in my life, but that doesn't feel, it's not what my soul, my heart wants right now. And of course, part of that too, I'm having the same time of the yearning of being, being outside more, doing more around our land, taking a lot of that responsibility off of Tucker's shoulders. And so it's just about listening to my heart rather than paying attention to whatever trend there may be or fitting into some box. It all boils down to, rather than listening to what other people think I should do or value, I am doing what feels good to me.
Mm.
And if that puts me in if you want to, sure, some of what I'm doing seems traditional. Yeah, I mean, a homemaker is traditional, and I can't think of anything more wonderful to be, putting my time into. I'm calling it, like, to be the matriarch of our family. What better way to make an impact than that, you know?
What's one way that you and Tucker have supported each other to still be so fulfilled and like in a relationship? I think it's been maybe 10 years.
Yeah, to 11 years, something like that.
Yeah. It's my way of asking, like, what's been the secret to you guys staying together and not just coping, but like continuing to increase and improve your life and your happiness?
Yeah, I mean, I think both of us just have a commitment to growth. Both of us are willing to be courageous. And I mean, and then, we love each other. I think, I don't think, love is important, but love isn't enough. You have to be, I think courage is a big part of it, too. The courage to look at yourself honestly, the courage to have difficult conversations. And that's big, me, I can talk about speaking your truth. That's been a big part of my growth, right? Because I repressed myself growing up and focused exclusively on, trying to like watch what everybody else was doing to like try to create like a safe environment around me, right? And so if that required, shutting myself down, cool, like whatever I got to do, to just, make this whole situation seem more stable. So yeah, so it's love, courage, and just a commitment to growth and understanding that, it's easy in a relationship, and I still fall into this trap sometimes, to blame the other person for your problem. But again, well, and I guess that the other thing there is, a willingness to take personal responsibility, right? And that can be hard sometimes,
Yeah.
and we don't always get that right. And sometimes he is blaming me for something, I blame him for something or whatever, but we generally get to a talk about it and get to a good place. But the only way that I've found that you can really move forward in a relationship is by taking, responsibility for yourself and your growth and your emotional health. And then, that generally everything else around you is going to improve, including your relationship, if you do that, rather than focusing on the relationship.
Mm.
Because a lot of people focus on the relationship rather than, because the problem's not with the relationship. The relationship is made up of 2 individuals. The problem is what this person brings to the relationship and what this person brings to the relationship. And then of course, you're attracted to each other because there's some triggers there.
Mm.
There's some, patterns probably that you're playing out to try to, come to a better result. But you've got to take personal responsibility, acknowledge that, and have awareness of it. And yeah.
You mentioned speaking your truth. So final question, will we ever see Veronica Max write a memoir?
I've got a working title for one.
Really?
I do, and I have had for
Oh,
years. I'll keep it to myself so that,
yeah,
yeah, I don't know. Maybe.
maybe.
Uh, yeah. Right now my energy feels best utilized in just being and, taking care of my family and all of that. But, maybe that will change at some point and I'll feel like, putting energy into doing something like that, but maybe.